On a gray morning in April, two divers cut a hole in the ice of Crane Lake and pulled up a car that had been missing for 12 years. The doors were still locked. The driver's seat was empty, and there was one detail no one could explain. The seatbelt hadn't come undone. It had been cut, cleanly from the outside. This is the story of Hannah Vale, a woman this town swore had simply driven too fast on a winter road. They were wrong, and some of them knew it. Hannah was 26, a third-grade teacher in a town of 4,000 people, where everyone knew her name and most of them liked her. She was engaged to be married that spring. She had already picked the date. She never reached it. On the night of January 9th, 2011, Hannah left a friend's house at 10:40. The roads were icing over. 12 minutes later, her phone went dark. The next morning, a plow driver found the guardrail near Crane Lake torn open. Tire tracks led straight off the road and vanished at the water's edge. Search teams dragged the lake for 9 days. They found her scarf, her shoe. They did not find Hannah. And they did not find the car. The county sheriff at the time closed it fast. Single car accident, icy road, body carried off by the current. Case closed in 6 weeks. For most of the town, that was the end. For Hannah's mother, it was the beginning of 11 years of letters no one answered. In 2022, a new sheriff took office. Going through cold cases, she stopped on one line in the old report. Seatbelt presumed released by victim. Presumed. No car had ever been recovered. So how could anyone know what happened to the seatbelt? That single word reopened everything. She ordered a sonar sweep of the deeper basin, the part the 2011 team never reached. On the third pass, the screen lit up with the outline of a car. It was Hannah's. And when they opened it, the story the town had told itself for a decade quietly fell apart. The airbag had never deployed. The car had entered the water slowly, not at speed, and the seatbelt had been cut with a blade. From outside the driver's window. This was no accident. Someone had put that car in the lake, and to find out who, the sheriff went back to the last people who saw Hannah alive. The first was her fiancé, Mark. He had reported her missing. He had cried at the vigil. He had also, phone records now showed, called her 14 times that night. 14 calls in 40 minutes. All unanswered. To investigators in 2011, it looked like a worried partner. To the new sheriff, it looked like someone who already knew she wasn't coming home. But Mark had an alibi. 3 people placed him at a bar 20 miles away until midnight. The calls, it turned out, weren't a killer's. They were a warning he was too late to give. Because earlier that night, Mark had received a text from Hannah. 4 words. She followed me again. She, not he. For 11 years, everyone had been looking for a man. They had been looking in the wrong direction. Hannah had one problem she rarely spoke about. A former colleague named Diane, who had never accepted that Hannah got the job and the life she believed was hers. 6 months before she vanished, Hannah had quietly filed a complaint. Diane had been showing up. At her school, her gym, once parked outside her home at 2 in the morning. That complaint was never mentioned in the 2011 file. It had been filed, stamped, and then quietly left out. And when the sheriff asked why, she found the answer close to home. The deputy who first handled Hannah's case was Diane's brother. This was why the case died so fast. Not a grand conspiracy, just one man protecting his sister, one small decision at a time. The sheriff pulled Diane's vehicle records. In 2011, she had owned a truck, reported sold for scrap 8 days after Hannah disappeared. But the salvage yard's records told a different story. The truck was never crushed. It had sat, forgotten, in a back lot for over a decade. On its front bumper, forensic teams found paint, a match to Hannah's car. Diane's truck hadn't followed Hannah that night. It had pushed her. The picture finally came together. Diane had run Hannah's car off the road, down the boat ramp, into the shallows. The car didn't crash. It was guided in. And the cut seatbelt? Prosecutors would later argue it was the cruelest detail of all, that Hannah was still belted in, still alive, when the water began to rise. In November 2022, 11 years and 10 months after Hannah vanished, Diane was arrested at her home. She said only 5 words: "You drained the wrong lake." It was meant as a taunt. Instead, it became a lead, because it meant there was another lake, and investigators believed they finally understood where Hannah herself had been all these years. 3 weeks later, in a smaller reservoir 9 miles north, they recovered her remains. After 11 years, Hannah Vale was finally coming home. Diane was convicted of first-degree murder. Her brother, the former deputy, was charged with tampering and obstruction. The town that had looked away was forced, at last, to look. Hannah's mother had written to that first sheriff for 11 years. At the sentencing, she read one line from her final letter. "I always knew the lake was keeping a secret. I just didn't know how many of you were keeping it too." A cold case isn't kept cold by the cold. It's kept cold by the people who decide not to look. Hannah's took 12 years, not because the truth was deep, but because it was convenient to leave it there. If a single word in an old report could hide a murder for a decade, how many other lakes are still keeping quiet? Tell me in the comments what you think really happened that night. And if you want the next case, subscribe to Nightfall Files.